Good afternoon, everyone. This is the City Planning Commission review session. Today is Monday, April 24th, 2017, and a quorum is present. The first item on the agenda are a series of land use actions proposed by the New York City Department of City Planning and HPD. The actions include zoning map and zoning text amendments and an amendment to the urban renewal plan. After introductory comments by Chair Lago, we'll have presentations on the plan by Calvin Brown and by Eric Olson.
Well, thank you. And with an advance notice or maybe warning to the commissioners, we have quite a packed agenda today. There's a lot going on at City Planning. And if there's one theme that runs through it, it's that we are an East Coast city, and today we'll be reviewing East Harlem, the East Shore of Staten Island, and East Midtown, so covering a broad array of different geographies. I'd actually like to make a few words, or say a few words about the East Harlem rezoning proposal, since it is something that the team at the Department of City Planning has labored on for so long. We're really pleased to be in a position to kick off the official public review process on the land use elements of an extraordinary initiative, the city's East Harlem Neighborhood Initiative. Now, our discussion today is only possible because of a remarkable process of community engagement, debate, analysis, and ultimately leadership. East Harlem was one of the neighborhoods identified early on by Mayor de Blasio as a priority for new affordable housing that's coupled with public investments to support that growth. City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito has been steadfast in guiding a comprehensive neighborhood planning effort through many months of meetings, active participation by the Speaker, the Borough President, the Manhattan Borough President, Community Board 11, local nonprofits, advocates. The East Harlem Neighborhood Plan was birthed. The plan lays out a host of priorities to enhance life in East Harlem, all aimed at ensuring that a much-beloved neighborhood remains affordable, vibrant, and livable, while also producing economic opportunities for its residents. And today, the City Planning Commission will, I hope, play its part by commencing the formal land use review of a proposed rezoning to advance the principles of this East Harlem neighborhood plan. Now, the zoning changes that the department proposes will do three things. First, they'll require permanently affordable housing. Today, there is no zoning mechanism that does this. Second, the proposal will promote economic development and reserve space for job-generating uses, taking advantage of the transit-rich neighborhood. And third, the proposed rezoning will preserve existing neighborhood character, particularly along the mid-blocks, and affordable housing as well. Now, these changes, which the team will present shortly, will help bring the community's vision to fruition. As you'll hear, the plan addresses more than just land use. And so the actions taken by city planning will be just one component of a comprehensive, multifaceted city initiative to revitalize East Harlem. Because this is a citywide initiative, we've been coordinating with an alphabet soup of other city agencies and also community stakeholders to prioritize enhanced programs, services, and public investments, all of which are aimed at allowing this neighborhood to thrive. As planners, we like to be in the vanguard because we know that sound planning is essential to sustainable growth. And so I'm especially pleased that the first step in advancing the goals of the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan is being taken by the City Planning Commission by commencing the formal public review of this zoning proposal. So now, as explained by the Secretary, our Manhattan office will present the proposal. I do want to emphasize that you are seeing the leaders within city planning, but they have been backed up by absolutely every division within city planning. It truly has taken a village to, or at least a department, to bring this here. So, Calvin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Today, the department is excited to present the East Harlem Neighborhood Rezoning Proposal, a series of land use actions proposed by the department that builds off of an extensive community engagement effort led by the City Council Speaker, Melissa Mark Viverito, that will create opportunities for new housing, facilitate economic development and job-generating opportunities, identify key capital infrastructure needs, and establish urban design controls in East Harlem. What we hope is evident by the presentation is the extensive amount of community engagement, interagency collaboration, and the careful consideration of the distinct conditions throughout East Harlem that resulted in a balanced but targeted approach. I'm the project supervisor, and along with Eric Olson, we will present the East Harlem neighborhood proposal. So just a rundown of the outline. First, we'll briefly talk about neighborhood context and background, then about the existing zoning and land use before talking about neighborhood study approach. Afterwards, we will get into the details about our rezoning proposal, discussing our strategies related to housing, economic development, infrastructure, and preservation, and conclude with information about the draft environmental impact statement. East Harlem in Community Board 11 is located north of the Upper East Side and is roughly bounded by East 96th Street on the south, East 142nd Street to the north, the Harlem River, the East River, and to the west, Fifth Avenue. The area was first inhabited and developed as farmland for the Lenape Indian group, and later followed by the Dutch settlers and free and enslaved Africans. In 1830s, the extension of the New York and Harlem railroads allowed for growth in the area, and by the late 1800s, East Harlem had the largest Italian community in the US. During this time, African Americans migrated into the area as well as immigrants from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. By 1950s, Latinos and African Americans were the predominant group in the neighborhood. Based on the latest census, there are approximately 120,603 people that call East Harlem home. Of the 46,000 households in East Harlem, more than 90% are renters. The median household income is approximately $31,000, which is more than 50% less than the median household income for Manhattan, and more than 40% less than the median household income for citywide. Also, East Harlem's median income is significantly less than the other two Harlem community districts, Community Board 9 and Community Board 10. A large share of the population has incomes below 30% of the area median income, which is less than $24,500. East Harlem has higher health impacts than most of the community boards in Manhattan, especially as it relates to cases in asthma, adult obesity, and premature mortality. In East Harlem, 75% of the existing housing stock is affordable through rent stabilization, rent control, and government assistance programs. NYCHA developments comprise 30% of this housing stock. However, in the last couple of years, neighborhood rental trends have shown median growth in asking rents increasing at a rate that is higher than the city. These trends are expected to continue on this trajectory, given there are a number of new market rate developments currently under construction or in the pipeline, and there are no affordability requirements under the current zoning. East Harlem was chosen as one of the neighborhood studies because these trends pose a threat to the existing affordable housing stock and limits the ability to provide additional affordable housing opportunities. There are areas in East Harlem where the existing zoning has been in place for over 50 years, and other areas where residential development is prohibited. Acting now, the city has the ability to leverage East Harlem's existing assets to create more residential and economic development opportunities that would benefit existing as well as new residents. The East Harlem Neighborhood Study advances and supports the goal of the mayor's housing plan, the Housing New York 5-Borough 10-Year Plan, to build and to preserve 200,000 affordable housing units for New Yorkers with a range of incomes from the very lowest to those in middle class, while creating diverse and livable neighborhoods. In response to the mayor's announcement that East Harlem will be chosen as one of the city's neighborhood studies, the City Council Speaker, Melissa Mark Viverito, convened a steering committee comprised of local community stakeholders to engage on a number of neighborhood topics ranging from open space to housing development and land use. The outcome of that process was the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, which provided over 200+ recommendations to the city based on these neighborhood topics and served as a guide for the city's efforts. As part of the steering committee process, there were numerous community meetings with local stakeholders, community members, and city agencies leading up to visioning sessions and steering committee meetings. These meetings provided an opportunity for residents to directly engage with community service providers and city agency representatives to share their concerns and how they envision the future of their neighborhood, while learning about the status of current and future city-sponsored projects and programs in the neighborhood. This information was collected by the steering committee subgroups, developed into recommendations that were presented to the entire committee under the various neighborhood objectives as shown on the screen. In the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, there were 3 main objectives and 30 recommendations related to zoning and land use. Some of the key goals enshrined in that plan under those objectives are increase the amount of affordable housing, preserving East Harlem's neighborhood character, increasing density in select places to create more affordable housing and job opportunities. Now I will discuss the existing zoning within East Harlem. As part of the 1961 zoning changes, much of the district was designated as R72, as shown in the yellow on this map, which encouraged lower apartment, this is a height factor district, which encouraged lower apartment buildings on smaller zoning lots and taller buildings on larger lots with less lot coverage. There are portions of the district that still has the zoning designation as shown, and most of the low-rise row house and pre-war tenements characterized by 3 to 4 story buildings were replaced by high-rise tower in the park and public housing development. Additionally, as a result of the urban renewal plans mapped in portions of the district, especially along Park Avenue, as shown in red, the red outline here, residential development was prohibited within 100 feet of the viaduct, which resulted in a string of parking lots and limited pedestrian activity because of the disjointed street wall and limited ground floor uses. There are a number of districts within East Harlem where residential development is not permitted by zoning. The northern portion of the study area, above 125th Street along Park Avenue, is characterized by a number of manufacturing and heavy automotive uses, although there are some residential uses that were there prior to the 1961 zoning changes. The Special Transit Land Use District, which is mapped in portions of East Harlem along 2nd Avenue, as shown in yellow along 2nd Avenue, were created in the 1970s in the anticipation of the 2nd Avenue subway. Existing provisions in the zoning are intended to allow for the provisions for critical subway access and infrastructure. In 2003, portions of East Harlem, east of Lexington Avenue, between East 96th Street to East 124th Street, were rezoned. This rezoning replaced much of the existing height factor zoning with contextual zoning districts that set maximum street wall and building heights. Unfortunately, the rezoning did not result in a meaningful amount of new development, especially along 3rd Avenue, where some buildings continue to have underutilized vacant upper stories. The current zoning along these corridors that were rezoned in 2003 do not have affordability requirements. In 2008, portions of East Harlem were also rezoned as part of the 125th Street Special District in an effort to strengthen the 125th Commercial Corridor. Special controls were included in certain areas of the district which restricted height limits. However, the height restrictions in the Special District, especially at the 125th Street and Park Avenue node, limits the potential of this area. So now we'll discuss the existing neighborhood conditions in the district. As shown on the map, especially in yellow, East Harlem is predominantly a residential neighborhood in character. However, there are strong commercial corridors that serve as anchors for the retail activity in the neighborhood along 125th Street, 3rd Avenue, and East 116th Street. Park Avenue throughout the district has a number of different uses and neighborhood character. North of 125th Street is comprised of mixed uses ranging from residential, commercial, automotive uses, manufacturing uses, and parking for sanitation trucks. The viaduct is a dominant structure along Park Avenue. The viaduct becomes elevated at East 97th Street and allows pedestrians to cross at various intersections. However, some of the conditions underneath the viaduct needs improvement. The structure of the viaduct changes from stone to steel north of East 111th Street. The west side of Park Avenue is more residential with some vacant land and parking lots between 115th and 124th Street. In the southern portion of the district, there are NYCHA developments that front on the avenue. The east side of Park Avenue is characterized by a mix of uses ranging from public housing, commercial uses, and community gardens in portions of the district, as well as manufacturing uses. NYCHA developments also front on Park Avenue on portions of, within the district. 125th Street and Park Avenue. In the photo, you can see the elevated Metro North Rail. This is an important transportation node in the neighborhood. The elevated Metro North Rail is located at this location and is 1 block west of Lexington and 125th Street, where the 4, the 5, and the 6 trains stop. However, given the anticipated 2nd Avenue subway and the amount of people that traverse this area of the neighborhood every day, this area has the potential to be much stronger as a transit and commercial hub, with opportunity linkages not only to Midtown, but to other areas north of Harlem like the Bronx, Westchester, and Connecticut. Currently, other than the recently renovated Coin Exchange Mount Morris Bank building, which is located on the northwest corner of East 125th Street and Park Avenue, and the bank and local retail at the ground floor of the Lee building, which you can see in the photos here, which is located on the northeast corner, there's very little ground floor retail activity happening at the streetscape. Despite the efforts to increase the activity in the area and make it more pedestrian friendly through the DOT Plaza program, there are still opportunities for improvement. So the DOT Plaza program was located on the south portion of the street underneath the viaduct. Looking south along Lexington Avenue. Lexington Avenue is a major north-south corridor in East Harlem. The subways operates along Lexington Avenue with stations at East 103rd, East 110th, East 116th Street, and East 125th Street. Express services are also provided at the 125th Street station. Lexington Avenue is characterized by the mixed-use buildings with residential uses and ground floor retail. The residential character of Lexington Avenue is predominantly tenement-style buildings ranging in height from 4 to 6 stories. This building form changes at East 118th Street and East 122nd Street, where there are tower in the park buildings are located on the west side of Lexington Avenue with heights that are ranging from 11 to 32 stories. And you can see the Miles building, which is in the back in this photo here. The mid-blocks. The areas west of Park Avenue between East 125th Street and East 132nd Street is characterized by well-maintained 3 to 4 story brownstones on the mid-blocks and 5 to 7 story mid-rise buildings on the avenue. The surrounding area is predominantly residential with a few ground floor retail uses along portions of Madison Avenue. But this context changes between the mid-blocks of Lexington and Park Avenue, where it's predominantly residential in character with some community facility uses. The residential buildings range in height from 5 to 6 stories, and community facility uses include churches and schools. Some of the mid-blocks contain open space that are accessory to the residential towers along Lexington Avenue. 3rd Avenue has a greater pedestrian activity and active retail uses and has a strong street wall fronting on a wide street. The corridor is an active commercial destination for local residents. However, the lack of development post the 2003 rezoning has resulted in underutilization of many sites and buildings with vacant upper stories along 3rd Avenue. Some buildings along 3rd Avenue are sealed off and is used as storage. Although a few recent developments have resulted in building envelopes that reflect the existing zoning along this corridor, most of these developments are market rate, and these developments are not required to provide affordable housing. And this shows another depiction of 3rd Avenue, and you have Tahino Towers that's in the photo. 2nd Avenue has many similarities with 3rd Avenue with tenement-type buildings and ground floor retail. East 116th Street, and this is a picture shown between Lexington and 3rd, is a very active commercial corridor with local retail uses. And as you go further east between 3rd and 2nd, the neighborhood context is more residential with ground floor retail uses. As I mentioned earlier, NYCHA comprises 30% of the existing housing stock. There are 21 managed NYCHA developments in East Harlem, with a concentration of these developments between 5th and 1st Avenue, East 112th Street to East 115th Street. Now we'll discuss DCP's study approach. The department's study has been informed and builds off of the objectives and recommendations included in the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, which involved an extensive community engagement effort. The 30 recommendations included in the plan related to zoning and land use that identify suggested areas for rezoning of privately and publicly held sites and suggest other areas for preservation-oriented rezoning provided a solid foundation for our zoning framework. As part of the neighborhood study, the department has worked collaboratively with the community and our interagency partners to develop a zoning framework that responds to the concerns raised by the community. This collaborative engagement process continues as the city agencies continue to meet with the steering committee subgroups regarding the various recommendations included in the plan. This engagement and partnership has informed the department's goals for the neighborhood study. And our goals are enshrined as creating opportunities for additional affordable housing, and that's permanent affordable housing through the mandatory inclusionary program. Modifying the zoning to promote and to preserve commercial vitality while creating additional economic development and job-generating opportunities. Collaboratively working with our interagency partners to identify and incorporate key capital infrastructure needs. And also modify the zoning in select areas to preserve the built neighborhood character and establish urban design controls that will improve the streetscape in East Harlem. In achieving this goal and addressing some of the recommendations in the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, we are taking a targeted approach to the rezoning in this neighborhood, focusing growth on the corridors that can handle the density and focusing preservation in areas where we want to recognize the consistent built context. It is important to stress that what we're discussing here is just one component of a robust city effort across various city agencies to provide a comprehensive approach beyond zoning, such as additional housing opportunity, parks, streetscape improvements, workforce development, and education, just to name a few. In our proposal, we're trying to strike a balance between growth and preservation. And in the next couple of slides, I will present a high-level explanation of the strategies that informed our zoning approach. And the next part of the presentation that will be given by Eric Olson will provide a greater level of detail of the proposed zoning districts based on the strategies that I'm about to outline. As part of DCP's nuanced approach, we are focusing our housing strategy in areas where modifying the zoning can create additional housing opportunities. And for the first time in East Harlem, ensure through the implementation of mandatory inclusionary housing, the program, that significant amount of new affordable housing is required. The mandatory inclusionary housing program will be the baseline from where affordability starts. And where feasible, additional subsidies could be applied to reach deeper levels of affordability on public as well as private sites. In addition to the housing strategy, the proposal includes strategies for economic development growth as well as job-generating opportunities. These are areas that correspond to areas where there are certain light manufacturing existing today, strong commercial corridors, and areas where the zoning can help create a new regional business district. The zoning proposal takes into account the future transit needs of this community that will come with the phase 2 of the Second Avenue subway. The proposal would modify the special transit land use district, which was originally mapped in 1970s and do not reflect the current location and needs of MTA in mapping their Second Avenue subway stations. The proposed changes will allow the MTA to incorporate subway infrastructure, such as station access and ventilation, into new developments surrounding the proposed subway stations. There are also select areas in the study's boundaries where the department is proposing contextual districts. These are areas where the department wants to encourage new development buildings that are appropriate for the existing and consistent with the built context. As you may recall, most of the mid-blocks east of Lexington Avenue were mapped contextually in 2003, and this approach will now be extended to the select mid-blocks west of Lexington Avenue. We're also proposing the creation of a new zoning district, the East Harlem Corridor Special District, that will include more refined controls regarding ground floor use, urban design, and parking. As shown in the different zoning treatments being proposed, this zoning framework is not a broad brush, but a targeted approach that takes into account each distinct area in East Harlem. The proposed zoning is just one component of the neighborhood study and has been developed to complement and support the number of efforts being proposed in the city, by the city. Taken together, these approaches are expected to produce as many as 3,500 units of new affordable housing, a significant portion which will be permanent, as well as over 2,000 new jobs. To achieve the objectives that were outlined, the Department of City Planning proposes a series of actions including a zoning map amendment, zoning text amendments, where we will map and establish the new East Harlem Corridor District, amend the special 125th Street District, amend the special transit land use district, and amend the Appendix F to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area. There will also be an amendment to the Milbank-Frawley Urban Renewal Plan, which will help remove some of the restrictions along the viaduct. So at this point, I will turn it over the presentation to Eric Olson, who will go into further detail about the rezoning and our housing and economic strategies, providing illustrative examples of how these proposed envelopes will fit into the context of the neighborhood and meet the goals of our proposal.
Thanks, Calvin, and good afternoon, commissioners. So you've just seen maps showing our broad approach within East Harlem. I will now dive into the detail by walking through each of the proposed zoning districts that constitute the proposed zoning map amendments. Here's a quick view of the proposal as a whole. Generally, we propose changes to the area bounded by East 104th Street to the south, Park Avenue to the west. Might not be the most precise pointing here, I apologize. East 132nd Street to the north, and 2nd Avenue to the east. On this slide, we've highlighted areas where we're focusing on our housing strategies, as shown in orange. Ignore all the gray areas. We'll be stepping through those areas one by one as we go through the presentation. Cross-subsidized MIH units will provide a baseline of affordability in East Harlem, ensuring that any market rate development is accompanied by income-restricted units for years to come. I will get into the MIH options in just a moment. But just in general, Calvin described these strategies a moment ago, and in the next several slides, I will discuss how we intend to accomplish our objectives through a nuanced set of zoning approaches. So obviously, we're beginning with our housing strategies, as you can see on the slide. The proposed actions aim to create a number of opportunities for new housing, with new residential development focused on corridors with the capacity to accommodate additional density. This will be coupled with a mapping of MIH in these areas, as you can see in the orange, which will require a percentage of new residential units be made affordable on a permanent basis. Recall that today there is no requirement to mandate affordable housing in East Harlem. For this proposal, both MIH options will be put on the table. Option 1 would require 25% of residential floor area to be dedicated to units affordable to residents with incomes averaging 60% of AMI, with an additional requirement that 10% of this floor area be made affordable at 40% of AMI. Option 2 would require that 30% of residential floor area be made affordable to residents with incomes averaging at 80% of AMI. The additional workforce and deep affordability options could be coupled with either option. On top of MIH, additional housing opportunities are available on a number of publicly held sites throughout the neighborhood. On these sites, subsidies could be provided to create more affordable units and reach deeper levels of affordability than mandated by the MIH program. One of these sites is Sendero Verde, which is indicated by the dashed orange boundary on the map. You'll be able to hear much more about this proposal very soon, as it's the next item on today's agenda. Before we get too far, I just want to point out that many of the proposed zoning districts actually have 2 available envelopes in order to provide the flexibility needed to allow buildings to respond to the differing built context and range of lot sizes in East Harlem. The contextual quality housing envelope is based on a standard contextual envelope. These include specified ranges for base heights and a specified maximum height limit. This envelope has been modified to allow lower base heights than typical contextual envelopes, which provides flexibility for certain types of developments that may benefit from a lower base height. I'll refer to this as the contextual envelope for shorthand as we move forward. The quality housing tower envelope is similar to the tower on a base envelope that we might see elsewhere. These allow maximum heights to be governed by available FAR with specified minimum and maximum base heights. We've modified the standard tower on a base envelope with additional street wall provisions as well as lowered minimum base heights. I'll refer to this simply as the tower envelope throughout the presentation. These 2 options will allow the construction of buildings that serve different needs while establishing a level of consistency in the pedestrian experience. I'll now go into detail about these envelopes in the various districts where we've proposed them. So you will be seeing a number of detailed slides on each discrete zoning treatment in the next several minutes. So this is just a warning. This might be a good time to go grab some coffee. The first district we'll be discussing is the proposed R10 district along Park Avenue, which would be grouped with the C25 commercial overlay and the MIH requirement. The mapping of this district responds to the presence of a major regional transit hub at Park and East 125th Street, which is located only a few blocks to the north. This transit hub includes several major transit stops, such as the Harlem 125th Street Metro North Station and the 125th Street stop of the Lexington Avenue Express and local subway lines. In addition, the MTA currently has plans to locate the terminus of the 2nd Avenue subway in this area. The area is currently zoned as R72 that we see on the slide right here. The proposed R10 and R10 equivalent districts in areas of Park Avenue close to the 125th Street node provide many opportunities to require permanently affordable housing pursuant to the MIH program in areas rich with transit access. The mapping of this district also responds to the width of Park Avenue, which at 140 feet, including sidewalks, is unusually wide. While the viaduct mitigates the perception of this width to a degree, the avenue has a great deal of capacity to accommodate density. On the slide, you can see our proposal for an R10 district along portions of Park Avenue from East 118th to East 122nd Street. This area would also be mapped within the Special East Harlem Corridors District. So here's an aerial view showing this section of Park Avenue facing to the northwest, showing the prominence of Metro North Viaduct. Recall that this area of park is characterized by a number of parking lots and some vacant land with existing urban renewal restrictions that prevent residential development within 100 feet of the viaduct on the west side. This slide shows illustrative buildings that could be expected to be developed in the area as a result of the proposed actions. Density would increase along Park as you move closer to 125th Street, taking advantage of the full block frontage development opportunities in this area to provide significant amounts of affordable housing. Massings for projected developments in the R10 section of Park are highlighted in yellow. As Calvin mentioned earlier, our proposal also includes an amendment to the Millbank-Frawley Urban Renewal Plan that would remove restrictions prohibiting residential use in this area. The development on the left has been masked using the contextual quality housing envelope. The R10 contextual envelope has a maximum base height of 155 feet. The minimum base height has been lowered to 40 feet along Park Avenue through the special district to respond to the viaduct. Above a base height, setbacks would be required. We are introducing added flexibility to encourage lower setback heights. The maximum total height in the R10 contextual envelope is 230 feet or 235 feet with a qualifying ground floor. To refresh your memory from ZQA, a qualifying ground floor is one where the height of the level of the second story is 13 feet or more above the level of the adjoining sidewalk. The maximum number of stories in this district is capped at 23. R10 districts permit a maximum residential floor area ratio of 12 under the MIH program. The proposed commercial overlay would provide 2 FAR of commercial use. As with all areas where housing strategies have been proposed, the Special East Harlem Corridors District would be mapped in this area as well. This would require, among other things, that non-residential uses are provided on the ground floor of new developments to a depth of 30 feet from the street line. This ground floor non-residential use requirement would help activate this stretch of park, which is currently underutilized by pedestrians, providing an important connection between East 116th Street and East 125th Street, both important commercial corridors. Non-residential use is shown in the massing and in massings to follow in brown on the lower stories. Recall that 2 building envelopes are available in this district. Shown on the right is an illustrative massing using the R10 Quality Housing Tower envelope. The R10 Tower envelope has a maximum base height of 85 feet, with the minimum base height lowered to 40 feet along the Park Avenue Viaduct through the special district. There is no maximum total height limit specified within this envelope. Instead, the amount of available FAR effectively limits the heights in these districts. The illustrative massing rises up to 280 feet, or 27 stories. The R10 Tower envelope would have the same FAR available as the contextual envelope, with the ground floor non-residential use requirement as enacted through the special district. Next, I will discuss the R9 districts we propose along Park Avenue, which would be paired with a C25 overlay, as in the majority of the residential districts that we've proposed. R9 is proposed along the west side of Park Avenue, between East 131st and 132nd Street, which is currently mapped as R72. These R9 districts transition to a lower density for areas further away from the transit hub at Park and 125th. And here's a detail of where we've proposed the same district further south along Park Avenue between roughly East 115th and 118th Street. MIH would be mapped in each of these areas, as would the Special East Harlem Corridors District. This view captures this lower section of Park Avenue looking to the northwest, just north of Taft Houses. This stretch of park contains some residential buildings that were constructed before the approval of the Millbank-Frawley Urban Renewal Plan. There are fewer parking lots here than in other areas of Park Avenue and a more consistent street wall. Possible developments in this area may be smaller due to smaller sites and the lower density district being proposed. The removal of the Millbank-Frawley urban renewal restrictions on residential use within 100 feet of the viaduct would also unlock residential development on this stretch of park. The R9 contextual envelope has a maximum base height of 125 feet, with a minimum base height again lowered to 40 feet as with elsewhere on park. The maximum total height limit in the R9 contextual envelope is 170 feet, or 175 feet with a qualifying ground floor. This is also capped at 17 stories. Through the Special East Harlem Corridors District, we would introduce a maximum residential FAR of 8.5 for all R9 districts, including this R9 district. So now we'll move eastward to discuss the proposed R7D districts along portions of Lexington Avenue and East 116th Street. We propose this district roughly along Lexington Avenue between 115th and 124th Street. This area is currently mapped with an R7-2 district. The R7D would introduce an appropriate density and built form that would complement the portions of the Lexington corridor with consistent character. C15 and C25 overlays are proposed along the length of the Lexington R7D district. Another R7D district is proposed along Lexington between 104th and 112th Street. This R7D on Lexington would introduce a contextual street wall requirement, which would encourage new development compatible with the existing scale and character of the corridor. The final set of R7D districts are proposed along East 116th Street. The mid-block between Park and Lexington Avenues is currently zoned with R7-2 with a C14 overlay, and the mid-blocks between Lexington and 2nd Avenues, here and here, currently have the R7A designation with existing commercial overlays C15 that would remain. R7D is proposed along the mid-blocks of East 116th Street, as you can see here, on all these mid-blocks as described between Park and 2nd Avenue. Higher densities are proposed at each of the avenue intersections in the area. And here you can see what the entirety of the portion of East 116th Street that would be rezoned would be. East 116th Street is one of the most prominent retail corridors in the neighborhood, and this strategy will focus density on key nodes to integrate this vibrant stretch with other key north-south corridors. The non-residential ground floor requirement will maintain consistent commercial activity throughout each area highlighted on the map, and the proposed rezoning to R7D districts on the mid-blocks will ensure that new development also includes permanently affordable units through MIH. This varied treatment responds to existing and proposed transit nodes at Lexington and 2nd Avenue, with particular attention paid to the existing scale of these mid-blocks. The R7D envelope proposed along East 116th Street would be the same as the R7D elsewhere on Lexington. Here's an image depicting Lexington Avenue. We wanted to show this to point out sort of scale and proportionality of the street. It's already, for the most part, been developed to a scale appropriate for the width of the street, which is 70 feet wide. Our proposed zoning is intended to mirror this built form. This image shows that East 116th Street has a similar character and scale. New developments utilizing the R7D contextual envelope could be expected to largely maintain the existing height and scale of portions of these corridors. The proposed R7D districts have a maximum base height of 95 feet with a minimum base height of 60 feet. Maximum total heights in R7D districts are capped at 110 feet or 115 feet with a qualifying ground floor. The maximum number of stories is 11. R7D districts permit a maximum residential FAR of 5.6 with MIH, and the proposed commercial overlays would allow 2 FAR of commercial use. So while we're discussing Lexington and 116th Street, let's talk about the zoning envelope we propose at the intersection of these two corridors. Within a 100-foot boundary of this intersection, we're proposing another R9 district with a C25 overlay. The proposed R9 district would orient growth at the existing transit node at the 116th Street station along the Lexington Avenue Local 6 line, allowing developments to locate new affordable residential units close to transit. Here's a view of that intersection facing to the northwest. Compared to other sections of East 116th Street and Lexington Avenue, there are more opportunities for residential development at this node. The R9 contextual envelope is being proposed in this area. Base heights available in this envelope range from 60 to 125 feet. This is slightly different than the previously discussed R9 contextual envelope along Park, where minimum base heights were lowered due to the viaduct. You can see a recap of maximum heights in this district on the slide. As with all other proposed R9 districts in the special EHC district, there would be a maximum residential FAR of 8.5 with MIH. The special district will ensure that new development includes active ground floor uses, which will further strengthen the vibrant retail corridor of East 116th Street. The R9 quality housing tower envelope is an option at this node as well. The R9 tower envelope has base heights from 60 to 85 feet, which is slightly higher than the proposed minimum base heights along Park, again, due to the different context. There is no maximum total height specified for this envelope, Again, heights are effectively limited by the amount of available FAR. The massing on this slide rises up to 175 feet or 17 stories. Use and FAR regulations for the R9 tower envelope are the same as under the contextual envelope with a residential FAR of 8.5 with MIH. So moving eastward to the lower portion of the 3rd Avenue corridor, we'll now focus on the proposed R10 district with a C25 overlay between East 104th and 112th Street. This area is currently mapped with an R8A district. Portions of this area of 3rd have been left out of the rezoning due to the presence of the Franklin Plaza Co-op towers. This is a view facing southeast along 3rd between East 106th and East 109th Street. 3rd Avenue has a highly varied built form with a combination of tenements, towers, and low-scale commercial buildings. This image illustrates the generous width of 3rd Avenue, which has the capacity to accommodate added height and bulk. This, in combination with the significant amount of development potential on the avenue and its access to nearby transit corridors, makes 3rd Avenue an ideal location for density. 3rd Avenue has more projected full block frontage development and assemblage sites than elsewhere in the study area. This view depicts developments using both the contextual and tower envelopes. Let's start with the contextual envelope. The 60-foot minimum base height applies to all contextual quality housing envelopes in the special East Harlem Corridors district outside of Park Avenue and is much lower than the usual 125-foot minimum base height for R10 contextual envelopes. The lowered minimum base height of 60 feet provides the flexibility necessary for the base of new buildings to better relate to the existing built context along 3rd Avenue. There is also a requirement for ground floor non-residential use in this area to maintain activity along this active commercial corridor. Use and FAR regulations would be the same as the previously discussed R10 district on Park. The full block frontage development sites on 3rd lend themselves to the use of the quality housing tower envelope. One such example is highlighted here on the slide. The R10 tower envelope permits base heights between 60 and 85 feet. No maximum height limit is proposed, but total heights are governed by the amount of FAR available. The massing here rises to a height of 290 feet or 28 stories with a base that establishes a more consistent street wall along the corridor. The combination of lot conditions in this area and the densities being proposed is expected to result in buildings of less than 35 stories in this area. So now moving on to 2nd Avenue. R9 districts are proposed along much of 2nd Avenue to direct new residential development in areas close to transit. This area is mapped with R8A districts currently. The proposed density increase would make MIH applicable to ensure that income-restricted units are included in new residential buildings. This slide highlights the R9 districts proposed along 2nd Avenue north of East 115th Street. This would cover portions of the avenue from 115th to 124th Street, excluding existing tower developments. South of 120th, we are proposing adjustments to the Special Transit Land Use District to accommodate easements for subway access and ancillary ventilation space. We'll describe more about these TA districts later in the presentation. On the lower portion of 2nd Avenue, we've proposed this same R9 district. Similar to the area to the north, this area of 2nd is currently mapped with an R8A district. The proposed R9 would range from East 104th to East 112th Street, excluding areas again with existing tower developments. You can see that a TA district would be mapped here as well. This aerial image faces southwest, generally covering the portion of 2nd between East 102nd, or 122nd rather, and East 119th Street. For reference, you can see the location of Taino Towers. Here you can see what the projected R9 contextual developments look like in this area. Note that the purple volume indicates a potential MTA ancillary structure that could be included within the projected development. These ancillary structures are not provided for in the existing zoning, but are critical pieces of infrastructure to support the future 2nd Avenue subway. Because the floor area allocated to this use would be exempted from zoning calculations, the total volume for this building could be expected to be bulkier and/or taller than a typical development at this site. Buildings shown in this area range between 9 and 17 stories. So now we'll focus on a portion of 2nd Avenue where a quality housing tower development could occur. This view faces southwest, looking at the area just north of the Jefferson houses. Here we can see what a projected development on the northwest corner of this intersection could look like if it were to include an easement for subway access or ventilation. The proposed floor area exemption would encourage mixed-use buildings with integrated subway access, which is more desirable than standalone subway infrastructure from an urban design perspective. Also on the slide is another summary of the use in FAR regulations applicable to the proposed R9 districts. We'll now move on to the economic development component of our rezoning strategies. These proposed zoning treatments are intended to promote the creation of new floor area that will bring spaces for jobs to East Harlem in areas of opportunity that are accessible to transit. These proposed zoning treatments include mixed-use districts, shown here in both shades of purple, with proposed commercial districts in red. These strategies are oriented towards preserving the character of existing corridors by continuing to allow the same commercial and manufacturing use groups as today, while at the same time increasing densities in certain areas to encourage developments with a desirable mix of uses. Other components include a new minimum non-residential floor area requirement and mixed-use districts of varying scales along Park. Commercial overlays are also being proposed to promote a more continuous, active retail environment along major corridors between East 112th and East 115th Street. These areas are shown on the map as a white rectangle with a red outline, and we'll discuss those more later in the presentation as well. So let's begin our detailed discussion of zoning districts as part of our economic development strategies at East of 125th and Park at the transit node. As we mentioned earlier, this area is situated to be a major regional transit hub with the existing Metro North and Lexington Line stations and the future terminus of the 2nd Avenue subway. This makes it an appropriate location for the density being proposed, which would permit significant amounts of housing and commercial activities at this important node. C64 is proposed along Park Avenue between East 124th and 126th Street, excluding the block frontage on the southwest corner. See here, so these areas, these block fronts in particular, lie within a C63 district currently within the existing special 125th Street district. C64 is also proposed on the west side of Park Avenue between East 122nd and East 124th Street. These southern blocks are currently zoned R7-2. These two block fronts would lie within the Park Avenue subdistrict of the proposed Special East Harlem Corridors District. Prominent buildings at the intersection of Park and 125th Street include the Corn Exchange Building on the northwest corner of Park and East 125th, and the Lee Building on the northeast corner, as Calvin explained earlier. Some of us may remember the Lee Building as the building Wesley Snipes swung from in the movie U.S. Marshals, eventually landing on a nearby Metro North train. Just to put everything in context here. Generally speaking, these block fronts are underdeveloped, particularly considering the wealth of transit options in this area that will be further enhanced with the construction of the future 2nd Avenue subway terminus. This diagram shows what developments could look like in this area as a result of the proposed actions. The transparent building in the foreground is a building that could be developed pursuant to the existing C47 district that permits developments of up to 10 FAR on that particular block frontage. Let's first look at the proposed contextual envelope in the C64 district, which is very similar to the R10 contextual quality housing envelope. So you can see in these two massings. Base heights are between 40 and 155 feet, with total maximum height capped at 235 feet with a qualifying ground floor or 23 stories. In order to ensure a desirable mix of uses at this important transit node, we are proposing a minimum non-residential floor area requirement, which will produce a mix of retail, performing arts, and other commercial uses at the base of residential developments with permanently affordable units through MIH. Non-residential uses in this area are given 12 FAR floor area, with 2 FAR of non-residential floor area required in mixed-use buildings throughout this part of the special district. This limits residential uses to 10 FAR with MIH. This will likely include both local serving and destination retail, in addition to other job-generating non-residential uses. Now we'll focus on the C64 tower envelope, which is similar to other proposed quality housing tower envelopes we've explained. Buildings on this specific block between 124th and 125th Street on the east side would be required to set back 10 feet from the street line in order to accommodate the high levels of pedestrian traffic adjacent to the Metro North Viaduct. Base heights would be 40 to 85 feet. This will allow a predominantly non-residential base in future developments with upper-level residential uses set back from the Metro North Viaduct. The massing shown here rises to 270 feet or 25 stories. Building heights here would be limited by available FAR. In addition, due to flight approaches to the LaGuardia Airport above 125th Street, heights are effectively limited here by the Federal Aviation Administration to roughly 35 stories. The same set of FAR and use regulations would apply throughout the C64 district. C6 districts are typically mapped in active business districts rich with transit access, making it appropriate for this area. Next, I'll describe the new M16R10 districts we're proposing along Park Avenue. To the north, we've proposed this district in an existing M12 district along the eastern block front of Park Avenue on a superblock between 126th and 128th Street. And we've also proposed it in an existing M14 district further to the south from roughly East 120th to East 124th Street. The M16R10 district would allow existing light manufacturing uses to remain while providing owners with opportunities to expand in place. The 2 FAR non-residential floor area requirement would also apply in these districts, as it would throughout the entirety of the Park Avenue subdistrict. Here's a view looking southeast along Park Avenue from East 123rd to about 119th. And here's a view of possible developments that could result from the proposed actions in this area. You can see the non-residential use in brown on the lower stories in the diagram, with a building configuration that allows residential uses to be located above the height of the viaduct. The M16R10 envelope includes base heights ranging from 40 to 110 feet, and the maximum building height, the total building height is 350 feet in this district. The maximum total FAR here is 12, with a non-residential FAR requirement of 2. As in the C64 district, this effectively limits maximum residential FAR to 10 with MIH. The proposed M16R10 districts would continue to allow light manufacturing uses, a number of which are located here today. A wide range of commercial and community facility uses would continue to be permitted, in addition to the introduction of residential use. The proposed M16R9 district is essentially just a smaller scale version of what I described for the M16R10. We've proposed this to replace existing C83 auto-oriented commercial districts on the west side of Park Avenue from East 126th to East 131st Street, excepting the block frontage where the Urban Assembly School is located. The lower densities and lower heights in this area are intended to provide a transition between the M16R10 district on the east side of Park and the mid-block preservation area to the west. There are a number of parking lots and auto-oriented uses in the area today, a substantial underutilization of this area considering its proximity to multiple transit stops. This view faces southwest from about East 128th to East 123rd Street. You can see the Urban Assembly School here for context. The massing in yellow shows one development we could expect in the M16R9 district. As with the other proposed mixed-use districts, residential units would be encouraged to locate above the height of the viaduct. Base heights in these districts would range between 40 and 85 feet with a total maximum building height of 285 feet. Consistent with the other proposed R9 districts, maximum FAR would be capped at 8.5. Due to the proposed 1.5 FAR non-residential use requirement here, the maximum residential FAR would effectively be limited to 7. Moving east from the Park Avenue corridor, we've proposed a C64 district on 3rd Avenue from East 115th Street to 124th Street. This would exclude the block front where Taino Towers is currently located. Today, C44 and C44D districts are mapped on this corridor. Here we see 3rd Avenue looking southwest from about East 125th Street, with Taino Towers prominently featured on the left. This aerial image gives a sense of the considerable width of 3rd Avenue, which highlights its highly varying built form. The proposed envelopes would provide the flexibility needed to allow developments to relate to these built form variations. As illustrated by the number of massings you see on the slide, there was a lot of development potential in this area. As with elsewhere on 3rd, the contextual envelope would offer a wider range of base heights, from 60 to 155 feet. Maximum heights are the same as with the other R10 equivalent contextual envelopes we've discussed. The total maximum residential FAR in this area would be 12 with MIH. 3.4 FAR would be available to commercial uses as it is today under the existing C4 districts. This would encourage new developments that match the existing uses on the corridor, which include several buildings with active upper story commercial use. And now we'll take a quick look at the C46 quality housing tower envelope, which is the same as the other R10 equivalent quality housing tower envelopes outside of Park Avenue. Applicable heights are shown on the screen. Recall that heights are governed by available FAR and proximity to East 125th Street. Here you can see a projected development that reaches 275 feet in height using this particular envelope. Density and use regulations would be the same as with the contextual envelope. Another component of our proposal is the mapping of C15 commercial overlays along major corridors between East 112th and East 115th Street, where the King, Johnson, and Taft houses are located. C15 overlays are proposed along Park, Lexington, 3rd and 2nd Avenues, excluding areas where schools and playgrounds exist. Active ground floor commercial uses could encourage more pedestrian activity in this area, connecting the vibrant retail corridors along the northern and southern portions of each of these avenues. This is a view of these blocks looking northwest from about East 110th and 2nd Avenue. This image depicts the tower and a park typology of these developments, which have largely resulted in buildings located far from the street line. While the proposed commercial overlays could help facilitate more convenient local serving retail uses available to residents of NYCHA in addition to residents of East Harlem, extensive resident engagement and a number of approvals at the federal level would be required before any new development could occur on NYCHA property. All right, so next I will describe our strategies regarding to the integration of transit infrastructure as it relates to zoning. The TA districts exist in East Harlem today in order to provide opportunities to accommodate subway infrastructure into new mixed-use developments to accompany the construction of the 2nd Avenue subway. One way we intend to accomplish our proposed goals is to be inclusive of modern infrastructure needs and better match where the MTA plans to construct new subway stations. The existing special transit land use district zoning provisions require new developments to certify that an easement either is or is not required for subway access on their property. Though the completion of the 2nd Avenue subway is not expected until 2027, it's necessary to modify the existing boundaries to correspond with anticipated station locations to ensure that the construction of subway infrastructure is appropriately coordinated with new development in these areas. Currently, the TA district allows required easements to be utilized for stairs, escalators, and entrance volumes, providing a channel through which infrastructure for the 2nd Avenue subway can be incorporated into mixed-use developments. The proposed actions would add elevators and ancillary ventilation stations to the list of subway infrastructure that can be exempted from zoning calculations. To accommodate future plans for the terminus of the 2nd Avenue subway to exist in this location, the proposed actions would map the district roughly between East 126th Street to the north, 3rd Avenue to the east, East 124th Street to the south, and 5th Avenue to the west. The proposed TA district boundary has been mapped to avoid areas where contextual R6A districts were mapped during the 2008 rezoning along East 125th Street. The proposal would also map a new TA district to accommodate an anticipated future 2nd Avenue subway stop at East 116th Street. The proposed TA district at East 116th Street would be along 2nd Avenue from roughly 115th to East 120th Street. And further south on 2nd Avenue, the proposal would expand an existing TA district where the future East 106th Street stop would be located. Existing TA district zoning provisions require new developments within these boundaries to receive a certification from the CPC and the MTA. These two entities make a determination based on a set of findings whether or not an easement for subway infrastructure or access is needed on the site. We are proposing text that would expand the potential use of these easements to include ancillary vent facilities and elevators. This joint certification could require easements based on findings related to a number of factors. On the screen, you can see what a modern ancillary ventilation station looks like at the new 72nd Street Q station in the Upper East Side. So this is what such a structure would look like as a standalone development with no integration into a larger building. Our intent is to facilitate the incorporation of these facilities into larger mixed-use developments where possible. So now we'll discuss how we've addressed urban design with our proposal. To achieve the flexible and responsive zoning approach we've just walked through, we are proposing that much of the rezoning area be incorporated into the new East Harlem Corridors Special District. This new special district is proposed in all areas shown on the map in both shades of blue. The EHC Special District would not apply to the areas shown in gray. Though I've mentioned a number of ways in which the proposed zoning envelopes have been modified through the special EHC district, I'll now summarize the provisions in the proposed EHC to provide a bit more clarity. The special EHC district includes use and bulk regulations, as well as other zoning treatments to activate the pedestrian realm. I've already mentioned the non-residential use requirements many times, which require a minimum amount of non-residential floor area in the Park Avenue subdistrict, which is in this darker blue shade, and ground floor residential use throughout the entirety of the special district. The special EHC district also removes parking requirements tied to residential use in order to facilitate the efficient production of housing without requiring the added costs of constructing parking. Just as today, public garages would be allowed of up to 150 spaces in many areas, with 100 spaces allowed in other districts, to allow the market to accommodate potential future demand for parking. The proposed special EHC district would include a new special permit for hotel use throughout the entire geography. This special permit would be required for any new hotels constructed before a residential development goal has been reached to ensure that new hotels do not compete with the objective of providing new housing units in the special district. This would also apply within the C64 district proposed within the special 125th Street district in this area. Another new provision of the special EHC district would allow residential and non-residential use to be located on the same floor, provided that an adequate barrier is in place to separate these two uses. I've explained much of the special East Harlem Corridors District's bulk regulations already, including the lowering of base heights along Park Avenue and in R10 equivalent districts outside of Park Avenue. This is in direct response to the varying urban contexts, which necessitate treatments that aren't offered by standard zoning envelopes. Additional bulk regulations are summarized on the slide. We've also included many provisions that are typically a part of enhanced commercial districts mapped elsewhere in the city. This includes a requirement that 50% of facades are transparent as measured between a height of 2 and 12 feet. These provisions would be relaxed for uses like light manufacturing, which could be constrained by this requirement. The special district also limits the width of residential lobbies to 25% of the building frontage, up to a width of 40 feet, with no lobby required to be less than 20 feet. Curb cuts would not be permitted along wide streets to ensure a continuous pedestrian flow. Additionally, a set of provisions is included that would apply to portions of the proposed rezoning area that lie within the flood zone. These were designed to encourage flood resiliency and good urban design by providing options for buildings that need to elevate their ground floor to reduce the potential for flood-related damage. And finally, we'll discuss preservation-oriented strategies. Before we get into it, I want to point out that these strategies are concerned with the preservation of built form as opposed to the preservation of affordable housing units or historic resources. Preservation areas are shown in yellow and the lighter cream color on the map. These districts have been mapped in areas that currently have a relatively consistent built form where new development might interrupt the existing context and scale. The proposed R7A and R7B districts will ensure that new development appropriately fits in with its surroundings. Establishing these contextual districts will remove existing incentives to demolish buildings in these areas. These districts will set a maximum FAR that closely matches existing building patterns and will introduce a height limit in these areas for the first time. Recall that a large amount of East Harlem was already contextualized back in 2003, which is shown on the screen in bright yellow. Our proposal would supplement these districts with additional contextual districts further to the west in appropriate areas. We'll begin with the proposed R7A district along Madison Avenue between roughly 126th and 132nd Street. Block fronts with school or playground uses have been omitted from the proposed rezoning area. This area is currently mapped with an R7-2 district, which would remain on the sites with school use. This section of Madison is largely characterized by residential use with some intermittent commercial and community facility uses. As depicted in this image, the street wall along this stretch of Madison is relatively consistent, as are heights and densities along the corridor. This diagram depicts how the R7A district would require new developments to more closely match the existing built form. The R7A envelope offers 4 FAR for new developments and is meant to be mapped along wider streets such as Madison Avenue in this area. Base heights could range between 40 and 65 feet or 75 feet with a qualifying ground floor. Maximum total height would be set at 80 feet or 85 feet with a qualifying ground floor. On mid-blocks throughout the study area, we've proposed a number of R7B districts as well. These are depicted in the lighter shade of yellow shown on the map. This view depicts the mid-block of East 128th Street looking from Madison towards Park Avenue. Each of these areas contains a consistent pattern of early 20th century brownstones, tenements, or other lower scale buildings with consistent heights and a relatively consistent street wall presence. The R7B envelope is meant to be mapped on narrow streets where we propose these districts throughout East Harlem. The maximum FAR is capped at 3, with base heights ranging between 40 and 65 feet. The permitted total maximum height is 75 feet, which is slightly lower than with the R7A. All right, and that concludes our section on preservation-oriented strategies. Here you can see all of our strategies combined in a map depicting our proposed map amendments. To state the obvious, I covered a large amount of information about the rezoning proposal. The numerous strategies covered are all directed towards achieving the intended goals of the rezoning, including to create opportunities for new housing, with a focus on opportunities to require new permanently affordable housing, to create opportunities for economic development while preserving the vitality of existing commercial and manufacturing uses, to support current demands and future growth by establishing a planning framework that is inclusive of modern transit infrastructure needs, to modify the existing zoning where needed to preserve neighborhood character, and to establish a special district with urban design controls that balance new development in response to existing context and scale. Hopefully, throughout the course of this presentation, it has become clear that DCP has employed a nuanced approach to this proposal. We've been fortunate enough to benefit from the extensive engagement and outreach conducted by the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan Steering Committee, whose land use and zoning recommendations have been closely studied and carefully considered by DCP in each of these areas. The result is a community-oriented rezoning proposal that takes a surgical approach to ensure that new housing and jobs in the neighborhood are located along the corridors with the most opportunity. More importantly, though, the proposal would lock in MIH in much of East Harlem to bring requirements for the creation of permanently affordable housing to areas where this requirement does not currently exist. The presentation will now conclude with a brief section regarding environmental view. There's only one slide left. In the draft environmental impact statement that was developed for the proposed actions, no significant adverse impacts would be anticipated in the chapters listed on the left. The DEIS does identify the potential for a few types of significant adverse impacts in other chapters. These include impacts related to construction noise, historic and cultural resources, transportation, including traffic, pedestrian, and transit, and shadow impacts on certain sensitive receptors in the area. And that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Calvin and I are happy to field questions from the commission.
Quite the tour de force of a presentation, and thank you to the commission for your patience and your interest in this. And now I will gladly toss it open for questions.
Excuse me, I just want to make one point of clarification. During my presentation, when I referred to the 3,500 units, that's the increment between the no action and the with action section, but we can expect that a significant proportion of those units will be permanently affordable as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Delos.
Kevin, I guess you anticipated my question about, more of the background about the 3,500 units, also about the 2,000 jobs. Obviously, that'll also be in the final environmental impact statement. So you don't necessarily have to go into that. The question I have really is, have you guys actually mapped the existing rent-stabilized housing units that exist, the 15% of the total housing, has that actually been mapped in the proposed area for rezoning?
So that's something that HPD will be doing. So we can expect to see that map maybe in their approach, but we haven't mapped it, Department of City Planning.
Okay, so one thing that would certainly, I would find helpful is if that were to happen before finalizing the EIS. That would be, I think, very, very helpful. And then I'm just wondering, in the existing manufacturing zone, do we have a bit of information about how many jobs are currently there and what level of engagement? I'm just be interested in what level of engagement those folks had in the planning process, because you said, obviously, there's the potential for increasing those uses, but also, you know, obviously, given the possibility of residential on those sites, it seems like that would be the more likely outcome.
There were a number of stakeholders throughout East Harlem that came to the steering committee meetings. Even the department were approached by a few of the existing manufacturing uses along Park Avenue. So they were informed and are aware of the proposed zoning districts that we're proposing. So they've been informed, yes.
And do we have information, though, about the existing uses and how many jobs are there now?
That should be, is that included in the?
We can isolate those particular manufacturing districts and provide that to you later.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, the only other question I had was about the East Harlem corridors piece in terms of looking at that. Can you just talk a little bit about the rationale about which pieces were included versus which areas were not included?
Between our proposal versus the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan?
For instance, yes.
Well, we focus on these corridors because we wanted to focus where we can maximize the opportunity to meet the goals of our neighborhood rezoning. As we stated, you know, east of Lexington Avenue, there was already mid-block contextual zoning that was done. And the corridors of 3rd and 2nd, we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity to have affordable housing. We didn't see that much development along those corridors, so we wanted to make sure that by mapping and including this in those corridors in this proposal, that it was an opportunity to have permanent affordable housing on any new development that will occur on those corridors.
Okay.
And if you're asking in particular, you know, within the proposed actions and proposed zoning map amendments, why we chose, you know, certain areas as opposed to others, we excluded the preservation-oriented areas. As you know, the purpose of the special district really is to balance new development in appropriate ways for the context and scale of areas where higher densities are being proposed.
Is there, as we've seen in other, you know, big city rezonings, there's often a package of projects by other city agencies to supplement this rezoning? Are there other, you know, streetscape improvements or transit improvements or parks or, you know, other things that other pieces of city government are going to bring to this process?
Yes, definitely. As I alluded to in the presentation, the discussions between the city agencies and the steering committee is ongoing. This is an extensive process, and the various agencies are continuing to meet with the steering committee subgroups to kind of discuss some of the recommendations. And as a part of the engagement process, each of the city agencies met with the subgroups and talked about the projects that are currently in East Harlem, that they're currently doing, and how some of those projects met the recommendations that were already in the neighborhood plan. But the discussions are still ongoing.
Are we going to get
Commissioner
further
Levin,
information about that? I mean, I think it would be helpful to us as we consider this zoning to know what else is part of the whole.
No,
Commissioner
definitely.
Levin, if I might, my comment at the beginning about us being the planners and the first out of the
Yeah.
block is that we are the early movers here, since our certification starts the formal public review process. And as it unfolds, and by the time it comes back, the commission will be presented with a
We'll have
far
that suite.
fuller
Okay.
picture
Good.
of the discussions with the other agencies.
And to that end, you know, we will be hearing about the Sendero Verde proposal directly after this you know, round of questions. And that was a specific recommendation in the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, where they recommended that additional public subsidies be utilized on public sites, on certain sites in the neighborhood.
Commissioner Cantor.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to compliment you on the paucity of information you provided and the obvious minimal effort you put into this. It's really, really a good presentation, and it was enjoyable listening to you guys. But I want to put on my Don Quixote jeans. As I was looking at the renderings, particularly with respect to the Park Avenue Viaduct, something just was jarring to me. We've been trying to minimize the effect of structure in between housing, and we did, I think, a tremendous job with the West Side rehabilitation, and we turned an old railroad trestle into a beautiful park. And here we are, building for lack of a better term, building a train thoroughfare between new housing, which just does what we did in the East Bronx when we built the Cross Bronx Expressway, splits neighborhoods. I don't know whether you've had the opportunity or even the thought of trying to encompass rather than just accept the railroad slicing through there. At the end of the day, if we were to build it as shown over there, we're really creating, I think, a canyon for noise, and certainly re-emphasizing the visitors of two communities. My question to you, and it's only a question, has any thought, has any consideration, has any discussion taken place with respect to the opportunity of incorporating air over the viaduct in such a way as to make the viaduct less obvious? And who owns that air?
Well, the MTA. Oh, over the viaduct
Yeah,
would be MTA.
Yeah,
We'll check.
we will verify that for you. Underneath the viaduct, a number of parcels are held by the city. The MTA structure itself is owned by the MTA. I'm not, entirely certain about the air above the viaduct, though.
has anybody even thought about this option before rejecting it? I'd rather be a rejection than a non-consideration.
Yeah, so the viaduct really introduces, as you point out, a very complicated degree of difficulty. And, one of the primary goals of our proposal is to really activate that stretch by bringing pedestrian use, bringing, active uses really to lower stories along the viaduct. So, we really are hoping to, through that particular approach and other, potential, improvements to the streetscape along that particular corridor, to better connect those two sides. I will also point out that in this particular section, the viaduct, while there are a number of steel reinforcement beams and such, that it is possible to sort of see through the viaduct. It is open in this condition. It's not the stone portion that exists further to
Well,
the
but
south.
you're not making, that would be done by city. I'm trying to find a way that, could we create an encouragement to the adjacent property developers in making that air available? In return for I don't know what at the moment, it's just, as I say, it's just struck me as we were watching.
Well, I mean, that's a good question, but I think our first step is to activate the streetscape. Is very limited pedestrian activity along Park Avenue. So part of our non-residential requirements on the ground floor is to make sure we can activate the streetscape.
Also, Commissioner, I might note that the areas where there has been decking are areas where there is a vibrant market and markedly increased density to support the cost of decking, which is quite expensive. And I would imagine that the amount of additional bulk or height that would be required to carry that cost would be out of keeping with the character of the surrounding residential neighborhood.
Well, off the top, it sounds logical, but with respect to the issue of density, we're creating pedestrian activity, we're creating density, we're creating needs in that area at build-out. And once again, I don't think this is a slam dunk. I know what it costs to build all the tracks. I've done it. It's just, at the end of the day, you got these tracks slicing through a beautiful new community.
Thank you, Commissioner. Duly noted. We'll write that down.
Thank you, and thank you for the nuanced approach to the preservation areas, which is noted by the Commission. I do have a question about two different aspects. One is the economic development, and the other is specifically the R10 zoning area. I'll start with that. Why didn't the 2003 and 2007 rezonings work? And I ask that because those were without any requirement of affordable, and now we're putting with an R10 and an R9 an affordability requirement, rightly so, but we are putting one there. What makes us think that we're doing the thing in zoning to make sure that developers want to build here?
I mean, I think there's a number of variables behind why there wasn't enough development. I mean, we didn't see the type of development that we saw post the 2003 rezoning. It's a very active commercial corridor, and we went from the R7-2 in that rezoning to just the R8, and maybe it wasn't enough, and this, I'm just conjecturing at this point, wasn't enough to sort of incentivize the sort of tear down and redevelopment of those sites. But in terms of us moving forward, one of the reasons why we feel like it's important to look at these corridors is so we can map the inclusionary. We're seeing trends where we're seeing development happening along 3rd Avenue, and they're building to the current envelope that is allowed, and affordability is not required. So we feel like by acting now and looking at these corridors, then we can map mandatory inclusionary housing, and there's opportunity for affordable housing in these corridors, as to just not do anything in these corridors and there's no affordability.
Okay, but we jumped up several levels to go from the R7 to the R10, for instance, to do that mapping.
So the R10 is currently proposed, at least on this section of 3rd, there's currently an R8A envelope. So there are a few instances where the R10 is proposed where there's an existing R7-2, but for the most part, it's mapped in existing higher density areas, R8 or R9 equivalents.
Okay, and then I just found the LaGuardia Airport Landing a very sobering thought, sitting on this commission, and I'm wondering why there isn't more of a discussion, or maybe there has been, about having a maximum height requirement even on the tower design, particularly since there are so many sites for either zoning lot mergers or air rights to be sold, that that is potentially something where we'd have, we could have an 80-story tower.
So, the Federal Aviation Administration regulations could change. We're not sure, where the next, runway or, flight path could be throughout the neighborhood. So while we want to be responsive to that flight path, there are, regulations within zoning, ZR Section 6100, that do apply to developments adjacent to the 125th Street corridor. It's fairly complicated to explain. It's a fairly complicated map, but generally speaking, as you move further away from 125th Street, the heights sort of increase gradually.
Mine was less about the flight pattern and more, has there been a consideration of a maximum height even for the tower, considering how many, how much available FIR there will be on sites that can be assembled?
Thank you for the suggestion. We have been working to provide the most flexible zoning envelopes that we can, and having more flexible height or lack of height limit rather does allow for more flexibility with bases to be more flexible and responsive to, again, what we see here are fairly highly varying buildings that exist in the neighborhood, including some fairly tall buildings on major corridors.
I don't think there's any building as tall as what we're talking about there. But I have one question about economic development, then I will let the other commissioners speak. I'm so sorry.
Actually, just to your question about the FAA height limits, the FAA itself prescribes limits, so we don't have to worry that a building could pierce the FAA height limit.
But below there, they could. I was just saying that if the FAA is concerned about height limits, shouldn't we as a commission be concerned 10 blocks south about height limits and whether or not an unintended, or maybe it is an intended consequence, would be an 85-story tower there, or something significantly higher, since there are so many sites where that could be assembled.
I think that with respect to the FAA's concern about safety, though, they map out the height limit within that. The very legitimate question about height apart from the FAA height limits.
Right, I was using it as an illustration of heights, and that others are concerned about it, and I'm saying that I'm concerned about it south of 125th Street.
Yes, and if you notice in Eric's presentation, we tried to make sure that the higher density was closer to 121st Street, where we're trying to really incentivize that as a regional and commercial hub. And as we expand out and move going further north along Park or even further south, that we went down to the R9 and it was a bump down.
Understood.
I think I would also just add one more thing. The largest sites that we anticipate developing in this neighborhood, or that would be even possible with the way that we've drawn the zoning districts, would be sort of full block frontage sites. And those sites, are fairly small, 20,000 square foot sites, which are definitely on the higher end of what we see in East Harlem, but fairly small compared to what you might see in Midtown on a full block frontage, or a full block.
Well, the commission is already looking at a 65-story tower on 97th and First, so this isn't a completely irrational question.
Right.
And then economic development. The case on page 10 talks about the 250,000 square feet of retail space as the commercial space. There's no mention anywhere within what we've had or what you've noted about office space, which seems like such a likely opportunity given the very zoning you're coming up with, and with the transit access, particularly if you consider the really great opportunity as a regional center. Is there any contemplation of significant office space, and how does that factor in, not as an economic development question for EDC, which I understand is coming, but really as a land use question?
Certainly, the zoning does accommodate office use, and we have projected a number of different office uses within the reasonable worst case. We are trying to be realistic. We would love to see office development come here, but that's kind of why we have this non-residential requirement. We think that that's very possible on some of these upper stories in particular, and the zoning does try to accommodate that particular use and does have flexibility for a number of other types of non-residential uses to fulfill that requirement, of course, as well.
But this is one of the largest uses in the surrounding neighborhood is actually hospital and medical use, so I just raise that as a potential economic opportunity.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. I had a question about, specifically about the parcel on 125th Street, 125th to 126, between 2nd and 3rd, which, at least in the prior administration, was envisioned as something called Uptown New York, which never really materialized. Is there a different vision? And I know this may be an HBD EDC question, but I pose it to you for referral.
126.
Yeah, it's C08033.
Oh,
It's-
so we call it the MEC site, the multi-entertainment.
Yeah.
So that was rezoned back in 2008 to
To
C63.
C63, right.
And they're working on that site. I think there was some litigation with one of the sites, the cleaners,
Mhm.
and EDC is still working on it. I believe they're going to make an announcement soon. I know that they're working on the site. The site is still going to be developed. But it already was upzoned to C63,
Right,
which is
I
our
remember.
R9 equivalent.
Right. Thank you.
Commissioner Marin.
Calvin, good afternoon, both, and thank you for your presentation. It's really well thoughtful and precise. I have a question regarding the Millbank Frawley site. I mean, I think it would be helpful to kind of map that out so we see the boundaries of what it was. And based on that, my question is basically about the parking lots that you see that are flanking the Park Avenue corridor. They seem to be very well organized and landscaped. Are those part of the developments that they flank next to, or are those freestanding parking areas?
No, it does depend on the particular lot. There are some that we know are tied to adjacent residential uses, that they're sort of owned by a cooperative structure. So, it would be difficult to arrange for development on those sites, but we certainly wanted to encourage it by mapping a higher density there.
Okay. And then I had another question. I'll come back because I can't remember right now, but I had another question relative to that. Oh, no, I got it now. So on the sites, you've carefully carved out what can go where. On any of these sites that you've projected, these larger buildings, are these active residential uses at this time at the moment? I know on Third Avenue there's probably not that many. You can see that there are a lot of commercial with the empty stores, the empty units above. North of 118th Street is where the development action really started happening recently in the last maybe 8 years or so, with 2 bridges and the school. And are any of the sites existing residential sites where displacement would occur?
There are residential uses on some of the sites that we've projected in the reasonable worst case. So, we would say, though, we did try to map, again, our residential districts, our higher density districts in areas that would really minimize that displacement. And
I guess then Commissioner Delos' question is very important, because then we would need to know which of those would be rent stabilized, because that really then effectuates changes that you're proposing. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. Thank you also for that very thorough presentation. Some questions about the retail. I wonder if we could go to 44, slide 44, in the Special East Harlem Corridors districts.
apologies if people get dizzy here.
40
long as you know
slides.
where it is.
40. Michelle asked, Commissioner Delos asked about the rationale for that, and you spoke to a few elements of the rationale, but I'm interested in the retail piece of this, and you speak to the need for active ground floor uses along these corridors. Could you sort of go into the rationale for why Park in particular as active ground floor use? And then you've used these terms seemingly, interchangeably, non-residential, active, commercial, active ground floor commercial. Office is different from retail. And so I'm curious how you're defining those and how we know this space isn't going to be ground floor office space, which maybe detracts from what you're trying to do.
So particularly along Park, I mean, our goal is to really activate that corridor and to sort of create some sort of retail continuity, especially if you look at the stretch between East 116th Street and East 125th Street. There's definitely an opportunity to really activate the streetscape, especially with La Marqueta at East 116th Street, and just with the other city efforts, DLT Plaza at 125th Street. We're trying to tie these corridors together. Third Avenue is already active, and Second Avenue, but it's really to really focus our efforts on Third, because you have this sort of disjointed street wall with the parking lots, with some, on Park Avenue, talking about the disjointed street wall. So by adding a non-residential use and sort of activating the streetscape with some commercial uses, or maybe even community facility uses, we're hoping to really create more of a corridor where pedestrians can go from 116th Street, tie all these commercial corridors together, especially along 116th and 125th Street.
But non-residential uses could be nonprofit office space, like we've seen on 161st Street, that ends up, the rezoning wanted that too. It wanted retail on the ground floor, and it didn't get retail on the ground floor because retail didn't want to be there, and we got office space.
And that is a very good point, and it's well taken. I think one reason, though, that we did, through the special district, introduce that transparency requirement is to allow for uses other than retail to still be present, to be visible, to still have eyes on the street from within those uses out onto the sidewalk. So even though it might not be retail, it still has an activating effect on certain areas. It can have an activating effect with this transparent requirement.
I guess I wonder, do we know if we're overbuilding commercial space here? The retail industry is contracting. We have retailers closing left and right because of the way people are shopping is changing. Do we know that this isn't going to siphon demand from, say, Second Avenue or Third or Lex, where we have active corridors that we want to reinforce, as opposed to create a competing set of uses?
I think there are a number of people in the area that do traverse 116th and 125th Street today, and given the location of the transit nodes, it is a natural sort of corridor. That Park Avenue stretch, it is a natural location to try to activate these residential or non-residential rather.
But the
ground
subways
floor
are on
uses.
Lex, though.
The subway is currently on Lex. The Second Avenue subway terminus will likely
And Second.
locate closer to
Not
Park
on
and
Park.
125th Street. It will locate at Park and 125th Street. The platform will probably go between Lexington and Park, and there will be access there. There's the Metro North Station currently at 125th and Park. And 116th Street is one of the more active corridors, across the corridor, not just at the transit node itself. So we did want to encourage a connection between those, existing strong retail corridors, as well as the, sort of promoting the same type of non-residential ground floor use through that non-residential ground floor requirement on Second, Third, and Lex, which has a lot of that already today.
And to Eric's earlier comment, it may not necessarily be retail, but it will be some sort of non-residential uses, especially along Park Avenue. We just feel like with the efforts that the city is doing to really strengthen East 116th Street, SBS just a couple of months ago announced Neighborhood 360, where they're looking to sort of organize the merchants along East 116th Street to strengthen that corridor. And then with all the work that we envision that can happen even on 125th Street, we just really see those as two anchors. So even if it's not necessarily residential, it may be some sort of community facility use that can locate and just, we want to activate that corridor. We want to make it a corridor that, can be as well traversed as Second and Third.
I think we do want to, sort of build upon the types of uses that exist there today. This is similar to what was recommended in the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan, sort of light manufacturing, things like bakeries, which can have both a retail element, small retail element, and a production element that do exist on that corridor today in some of the images that we were providing earlier, that do have somewhat of an activating effect that would bring people there because they have jobs there. And there is an opportunity for it to be a different type of corridor than what we'd see on Second or Third Avenue.
I still have concerns about that. And I wonder, with respect to 116th Street, why doesn't this district extend over to East River Plaza? I mean, we have, very active set of commercial uses, and folks are presumably walking to, the big box that's there. I'm not sure why we would not choose to activate that, or explain to me why that wasn't included, and how the connection to East River Plaza, if there is one, is anticipated.
Well, I mean, East River Plaza is a separate project in itself. But as we move further east along East 116th Street, you can see in the photo that we use here, is more residential and then ground floor retail. It doesn't have this the level of retail activity between Third and Lexington. It's more, ground floor retail, local, yeah. I mean, with some restaurants, I see some restaurants.
But isn't that what we want to encourage, right? I mean, it's existing space that lends itself to retail. It just seems that you'd want transparency requirements there, you'd want to encourage ground floor retail, you'd particularly want to activate that corridor, because at the end is an anchor.
We appreciate the point. Just to sort of to illustrate why we chose it, though, we did want to be respectful of the existing context, and that was really the idea for promoting the areas that we are looking at on 116th Street. And yeah, I think that that's just also worth mentioning that the ground floor non-residential requirement would also apply there, going to third, or all the way to second, rather.
Thank you.
This is just a very brief, since I put out there about mapping the the 15% of the housing that's rent regulated, I'm going to add to the request to HPD. If we could also add to that mapping the government assisted, and it'd be really helpful to know on that, the nonprofit versus for-profit owned, and then what are the regulatory periods on the government assisted, and the median rents and the median incomes. Again, to me, I'd love to see that map side by side with the overlay of the proposed rezoning. You know, I've seen the demolition of sound rent regulated housing when that was an unintended consequence. And our secret analysis does not point that out, so we really need to understand what might be at risk as we're trying to achieve more affordable housing that's permanently affordable.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Eflin.
Could we add to those housing requests any planned improvements by NYCHA? Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
And as a subset of my previous question, what's HPD's affordable housing plan for this area?
The rezone.
I want to thank the commission. I want to assure you that NYCHA and HPD have been part of the community engagement process. We thought we pushed ourselves really hard in coming up with this plan, and I want to thank the commissioners for pushing us even further. I think you've raised very important issues with respect to the current protected housing stock. You've challenged us to put on our Don Quixote hats. You have asked for information about the engagement with other agencies, which will unfold throughout the public review process. You've asked us to consider heights and also to go back and take a harder look at the retail and how we can encourage the type of retail development that the community has asked for. So thank you very, very much. I would also offer to the commissioners that we would be pleased to take you on a walking tour of the neighborhood. It's relatively, hop on the subway from here, and if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I would say a walking tour is worth 1,000,000 words to get a sense of just how diverse the neighborhood is, but also how nuanced, how finely grained our zoning proposal is. I also want to assure the commissioners that there is ongoing engagement with the community and with their elected officials, and so you will see other facets of how the city is advancing the goals of the neighborhood plans unfolding between now and when this rezoning will return to the commission for action. So with that, thank you to the team. This has been almost a 2-hour presentation, but it has been very helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this
And
is,
we assume now that this application is certified.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, let's now go to item number 2, page 80, thereto, which involves a series of land use actions, zoning map and zoning text amendments, UDAP designation, project approval, disposition of city-owned property, acquisition, special permits, and the City Planning Commission's certification to facilitate a mixed-use development, including affordable housing. Our presenter is Sarah Elmore with the Manhattan office. Once again, we're on item number 2, page 80.
And if I might actually again preface this, as Vice Chair Knuckles just noted to me, this is a site that has lain empty for a long time. The community has been quite focused on seeing activity brought to this site. And so this is an example of how HPD is implementing the strategy as part of the broader East Harlem Neighborhood Initiative. Now, this is going to be a 100% affordable development, but this project goes even beyond that. Sendero Verde means green path, and there will be a green space, as you'll see, through the center of the building. It will also include a pre-K facility that the community has been asking for. And to boot, it will include 4 community gardens as well. So this is exactly the type of project that, that drives us to undertake the plan that our zoning is intended to facilitate. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Lago, Commissioners. This is an application by the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development for a number of discretionary actions to facilitate the development of a mixed-use building with residential, commercial, and community facility uses on a block bounded by East 112th Street, Park Avenue, East 111th Street, and Madison Avenue. The applicant is seeking a zoning map amendment to rezone an existing R72 zoning district with an C14 overlay to an R9 zoning district with a C25 overlay, a zoning text amendment to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area, Urban Development Action Area Plan, or UDAP, designation and project approval for the disposition area, disposition of city-owned property, acquisition of a portion of the disposition area by the city for community garden use, a special permit pursuant to section 74743 to modify the bulk regulations within a large-scale general development to modify height and setback restrictions and yard requirements applicable to the proposed development, a special permit pursuant to section 74744B to permit commercial floor area to be located above the second story in a mixed-use building, special permit pursuant to section 74532 to waive up to 129 accessory parking spaces required in connection with non-income restricted dwelling units within the proposed development, and a City Planning Commission certification pursuant to section 32435 to waive the requirement that a minimum of 50% of a building wall facing upon a wide street be occupied at the ground level by commercial use. The project area is located in the East Harlem neighborhood of Manhattan in Community District 11. The properties surrounding the project area are zoned R72 and R8A with a C15 overlay mapped along 110th Street between Park and Madison Avenues, and a C14 and C24 overlays mapped along Madison and Park Avenues. The majority of the surrounding area is located within an R72 district, which is a medium-density residential height factor district that permits residential development within a range of 0.87 and 3.44 FAR, and community facility development with an FAR of up to 6.5. However, as was just discussed in detail in the previous presentation on the proposed East Harlem rezoning, portions of the surrounding area are proposed to be rezoned. To the north of the project area are the Taft Houses, New York City Housing Authority public housing development. The development consists of 9 19-story multifamily buildings constructed as a tower in the park development. Central Park is located just southwest of the project area, and the site is served by the 2 and 3 trains at 110th Street and Lenox Avenue, and the 6th train at 110th Street and Lexington Avenue, and the site's also served by a number of local bus lines. The project area is an entire block bounded by Park Avenue to the north, Park Avenue to the east, East 111th Street to the south, Madison Avenue to the west, and East 112th Street to the north. The project area contains approximately 76,576 square feet of lot area. The majority of the project area is city-owned parcels, and you can see that the city-owned portions are all contained in this red outline here. The remaining 2 lots located on the project area are privately owned and not part of the development site. Lot 21, which is located right here, is improved with a single 4-story building comprising approximately 4,100 square feet of floor area and containing 8 residential units as well as 2 commercial units. Lot 34, located right here, is currently utilized as surface parking and used for storage. In prior years, part of the development site was used as a baseball field by the East Harlem Little League under temporary license with HPD. The license agreement expired in October of 2016, and the East Harlem Little League has obtained a permit through the Parks Department to play on nearby Parks Department field. The lots previously licensed to the Little League are currently vacant. And then you can see right here, this is one of the out parcels with the 4-story development. You can see the vacant lot where the Little League used to play. I'm trying to see this This right here is the lot 34, which is the vacant parking lot. The development site currently contains 6 interim green thumb gardens that are located on city-owned parcels along Park and Madison Avenue block frontages. These interim gardens operate under a temporary license agreement with HPD, which have allowed for garden-related activities until a viable development scenario can be achieved for the site. The proposed development includes the construction of 3 predominantly residential mixed-use buildings on the development site, ranging in height from 10 to 37 stories. In total, the proposed development contains approximately 718,447 square feet of floor area, or 9.15 FAR, of which approximately 544,069 square feet of floor area will be residential, or 7.1 FAR. 33,794 square feet will be commercial, that is 0.44 FAR, and 140,485 square feet, or 1.6 FAR, of which will be community facility use. The development will occupy all frontages of Block 1617 along East 111th Street, Madison Avenue, East 112th Street, and Park Avenue, on all areas except for those development sites that are not owned by the city currently. The 3 predominantly residential buildings will contain approximately 655 affordable dwelling units with a mix of studio, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The units will provide housing for individuals and families at a mix of incomes between 30% and 130% area median income. No accessory parking will be provided as a part of the proposed development. Building A, seen outlined in red, is proposed to be located at the intersection of Madison Avenue and East 112th Street. It is proposed to have a 3-story base that rises to a height between 47 and up to 85 feet. Above the base, the building would set back the required 10 feet from the street line and then rise to 37 stories with a height of up to 458.5 feet. Building A will contain approximately 365 residential units with approximately 308,723 square feet of residential floor area and approximately 10,311 square feet of community facility floor area and approximately 32,194 square feet of commercial floor area. And the part of this commercial floor area will include a supermarket. Building B, seen right here, is proposed to be located along the remainder of East 112th Street frontage and wrap around Madison Avenue for a depth of approximately 72 feet. It is proposed to have up to a 5-story base that rises up to 85 feet above the base plane. Above the base, the building would set back the required 10 feet from the street line and rise to a height of 15 stories with a height of up to 218.5 feet. Building B will contain approximately 211 residential units with approximately 163,945 square feet of residential floor area and approximately 120,934 square feet of community facility floor area. And of this community facility floor area, a portion of which would be a charter school. Building C, seen right here, is proposed to be located on the mid-block frontage of East 111th Street. It is proposed to have up to a 7-story base that rises up to 94.34 feet above the base plane. Above the base, the building will rise to a height of 10 stories, with up to a height of approximately 151.34 feet. Building C will contain approximately 79 residential units with approximately 71,401 square feet of residential floor area and approximately 10,941 square feet of community facility use. Buildings A, B, and C will be built to passive house standards. To achieve passive certification, the project will employ a number of sustainability features, including a stormwater detention tank to provide recycled water to the on-site community gardens, bioswales, and street trees on the sidewalks surrounding the site, photovoltaic arrays on each of the bulkheads and green roofs featuring solar pergolas with photovoltaic arrays. The proposed buildings will form a courtyard within the center of the proposed development. The courtyards formed by the proposed buildings will provide passive landscape recreation space and proposes to include features such as a medicinal garden, seating, and general green space. Public entrances to the courtyards will be provided along Park Avenue through a staircase and elevator, as well as along East 111th Street through an ADA accessible path. The courtyard will be accessible through rear entrances that join the community facility spaces. Community gardens will be located on the corner of Park Avenue and East 111th Street, on the corner of Madison Avenue and East 111th Street, and on East 111th Street, extending in a terrace fashion towards the elevated courtyards described above. So the garden areas are located here, here, and here. The garden area will accommodate approximately 4 of the existing interim Green Thumb gardens. The remaining 2 gardens located on the development site have been offered relocation sites on other nearby existing DPR gardens pursuant to the garden rules. A dedicated community room and bathroom, which will be available to members of all 4 gardens, will be located within Building A. An additional bathroom will be located adjacent to the community gardens on Park Avenue. Additionally, a public pathway will pass through the gardens located along East 111th Street, connecting to the interior courtyard, which must be maintained by the owner of the proposed development and remain accessible to the public during hours to be determined through negotiations between the City of New York and the developer. According to the applicant, the proposed orientation of the 3 primary residential buildings within the proposed development are to be massed in a manner that preserves the maximum amount of open space that currently exists within the development site and offers a design that provides contextual juxtaposition to the tower and the park developments located directly to the north and a contextual counterpart to the mid-rise development in the surrounding area. Further, the applicant asserts that contextual street walls and height of the proposed development provide a balanced composition massed at a complementary scale rising from the street line with various heights to provide visual variety. Furthermore, the applicant indicated that by orienting the community gardens along East 111th Street, the south-facing frontage of the development site, their placement is optimized to receive the maximum amount of sunlight available to ensure the success of the gardens planted in these areas. Okay, so now the actions necessary to facilitate the project. The applicant seeks a zoning map amendment to change the project area from an R72 zoning district with a C14 commercial overlay along the Park and Madison Avenue frontages to an R9 zoning district with C25 commercial overlays along the Park and Madison Avenue frontages. The proposed R9 C25 district is intended to facilitate the development of affordable housing, provide community facility space, and to provide continuity on the Madison Avenue commercial corridor. According to the applicant, the proposed R9 zoning is consistent with the context of the buildings in the surrounding area and conforms to the prevailing trend towards high-density residential development in the neighborhood. All of the blocks located immediately north of the project area contain buildings constructed in the tower park style and rise up to 20 stories. The project area is also 3 blocks north of a recently approved affordable housing development that also utilizes an R9 residential district. The R9 district bulk regulations are proposed for the project area, permit buildings up to 175 feet in height that must be located at the street line, and provide a permitted bulk envelope at the development site location, which according to the applicant serves to mediate the existing tower in the park high-rise developments located to the north and west from the existing mid-rise buildings located to the west and south. The C25 designation is consistent with overlays proposed as a part of the East Harlem neighborhood rezoning and will permit commercial development on the site. According to the applicant, the proposed R9 C25 zoning district is appropriate for the project area as it will facilitate the proposed development, which has been designed with a zoning envelope and bulk arrangement that is an appropriate addition to the neighborhood and facilitates the reincorporation of community gardens onto the site. The proposed R9 zoning designation will permit the floor area generated by the development site to be spread out over the proposed development without regard of the width of the streets. The applicant also seeks to amend Appendix F of the zoning resolution to establish a mandatory inclusionary housing area over the project area. The applicant is proposing to utilize option 2 and therefore request the City Planning Commission and City Council to allow the MIH affordable housing requirements to be met by complying with Section 23154D32 requirements and providing no less than 30% of the residential floor area to households earning an average of 80% AMI. The applicant is requesting approval of an urban development action area and project approval and the disposition of city-owned property. The applicant also requests to acquire a portion of the disposition area as used as community garden space and a publicly accessible path. The garden area and path portion would be acquired by the city upon or before project completion, including completion of construction of the garden area and path. The applicant is seeking a special permit from the City Planning Commission pursuant to Section 74743 to modify the bulk regulations within a large-scale general development, to modify height and setback restrictions and yard requirements applicable to the proposed development as follows. Pursuant to Section 2365, the tower regulations, buildings developed with a tower shall comply with either a tower and a base or standard tower regulations. Pursuant to Section 2365A, any building with more than 25% of its total floor area dedicated to residential use and is located on a zoning lot that fronts upon a wide street and is in width 125 feet from a wide street frontage along the short dimensions of the block, or within 100 feet from a wide street frontage along the long dimensions of the block, must be developed or enlarged pursuant to the tower and the base provisions. Further, if any building is developed with a tower, then the entire zoning lot shall be subject to the tower and the base provisions. Section 2365B provides that standard tower regulations of Section 23652 apply to any building that does not meet the location criteria of Section 2365A. Since all the buildings on the proposed development site, including those portions beyond 125 feet from the wide street frontage along the short dimensions of the block, and beyond 100 feet from the wide street frontage along the short dimensions of the block, are proposed to be subject to the tower and the base provisions, the applicant is requesting that the Commission waive the location criteria of Sections 2365A and 2365B to apply the tower and the base regulations to the entire development site. Section 23651A1 requires that at all levels, a tower meeting the location and floor area requirements of Sections 23665A that are developed on zoning lots of at least 20,000 square feet shall occupy between 30 and 40% of the lot area in the aggregate. As previously discussed, a portion of the proposed development will not meet the location criteria of Section 2365A, and the applicant is requesting that the Commission permit the aggregate tower calculation to be based upon the entire area of the development site, including those areas beyond 125 feet from the wide street frontage along the short dimensions of the block. Further, since tower coverage ranges from 51%, which you can see right here, at 85 feet to 13% above 196.5 feet, which you can see right here, the applicant is requesting the Commission to modify the tower coverage requirements to permit the towers of all buildings on the zoning lot to occupy, in the aggregate, an area comprising less than 30% of the lot area of the zoning lot at the upper levels of the tower, and more than 40% of the lot area at the zoning lot at the lower levels of the tower. Section 23651A3 requires that a minimum of 60% of the total floor area permitted on the zoning lot be located below 150 feet. As the proposed development will contain 424,169 square feet of zoning floor area, or 55% of the total floor area, will be located below 150 feet, the applicant requests that the Commission modify floor area location requirements to permit 55% of the total floor area to be located below 150 feet. Section 23651B1 requires that a street wall is provided for the entire frontage of zoning lots fronting on wide streets and on narrow streets within 125 feet of an intersection of a wide street and further. Section 3564A1 requires that mixed-use buildings developed as tower on the base in R9 or N10 districts with a commercial overlay provide a street wall for the entire width of a street wall of a base, be located on the street line of zoning lots fronting on wide streets and on narrow streets within 30 feet of its intersection with a wide street. As the community gardens are proposed for much of the frontages of Park Avenue, right here, which is a wide street, and East 111th Street here, which is a narrow street, within 125 feet of its intersection with Park and Madison Avenues at the southern corner of Madison Avenue, also right here, there's another garden proposed. No street wall is proposed for those areas. Additionally, no street wall will be provided at the northeast corner of the zoning lot at the intersection of Park Avenue and East 112th Street, as the proposed ground floor of Building B will be undercut at the ground floor. And you can see that area right here. The applicant requests that the commission modify the street wall requirements pursuant to section 23651B1 to prevent the proposed development to not occupy the entire frontage of the zoning lot along a wide street and on narrow streets within 125 feet of its intersection with a wide street, and to permit the base of the street wall of the proposed development to not be located entirely at the street line. Section 23651B4 requires that all ground level open areas located between the street line and the street wall of a base be landscaped except in front of entrances and exits to buildings. As a portion of the ground floor of Building B will be undercut at the northeast corner of the zoning lot, located once again right up here, at the intersection of Park Avenue and East 112th Street, there will be approximately 8 feet of open space between the street line and the street wall of the base that is not proposed to be landscaped and is proposed to be a space where children attending the charter school can gather. The applicant is requesting that the commission allow the open area at the ground level between Park Avenue and East 112th Street, the street lines of the street wall of the proposed Building B not fronting on an entrance or exit to not contain landscaping. Pursuant to section 23651A5, no tower that is more than 100 feet from the intersection of a wide street is permitted to be located on a narrow street. Since the proposed Building C is located on East 111th Street, which is a narrow street, approximately 225 feet from the intersection with Park Avenue, right here, the applicant is requesting that the commission permit the towers in the proposed development to be located on a narrow street more than 100 feet from the intersection with a wide street. Section 23651A4 requires that towers along a narrow street set back a minimum of 15 feet from the street wall at any level, that towers along a wide street set back a minimum of 10 feet from a street wall at any level. The maximum base height for a tower in a base building developed within an R9 zoning district is 85 feet. Since the proposed Building C is located on a narrow street and first sets back 15 feet from the street wall at a height of 94.34 feet, a portion of the tower will be located at the street line. The applicant requests that the commission modify the tower setback requirements to permit the portions of towers in the proposed development to be located at the street line, Section 23651B2 requires that the street wall of a base rise to a height between 65 and 85 feet. As the base of Building A is proposed to rise to a height between 47 and 60 feet before setback, and the base of Building C is proposed to rise to a height of approximately 94 feet before setback, the applicant is requesting the commission modify the base height requirements of Section 23651B2 to permit the base of the proposed tower in the base development along Madison Avenue and portions of 112th Street to set back from the street line between a height of 47 and 60 feet above the curb level, and to permit the base height along East 111th Street and East 112th Street to exceed a height of 85 feet above the curb level, as depicted on the plan submitted with this application. Section 23382 requires that an open area with a minimum depth of 60 feet midway or 5 feet of being midway between two street lines. Community facilities are permitted within rear yard equivalents 100 feet beyond the street line of a wide street, provided that the community facility is used for a school, house of worship, college or university, or a hospital use. These facilities may be up to a height of 1 story, but not exceeding 23 feet. A portion of the proposed development will include a community facility that is not a permitted school, house of worship, college or university, or hospital use that will obstruct the rear yard equivalent. The applicant requests that the commission consider a community facility that does not contain a school, house worship, college or university, or hospital use as a permitted instruction. The applicant requests a special permit from the City Planning Commission pursuant to Section 74744B to allow commercial use to be located at the level, above the level of a second story in a mixed-use building contrary to the provisions set forth in sections 3242 and 32435C. Section 3242 does not permit commercial uses within a predominantly residential building to be located above the second level. The proposed development includes space for healthcare-related offices at the second and third levels of Building A. And you can see right here is the third floor where the community facility, or the commercial use, is proposed. The special permit is requested to permit commercial uses to be located above the second level of Building A. The applicant requests a special permit from the City Planning Commission pursuant to Section 74532 to waive up to 129 accessory off-street parking spaces required in connection with up to 322 units affordable to families earning over 80% area median income within the proposed development. Section 2523 of the zoning resolution requires that accessory off-street parking spaces are provided for a minimum of 40% of new dwelling units in R9 zoning districts, affordable to families earning incomes of 80% AMI or higher. The proposed development may include up to 322 units of affordable housing that will be rented to families earning incomes of 80% AMI or higher. In connection with these units, up to approximately 129 off-street accessory parking spaces may be required to be provided in the proposed development. The proposed special permit would waive the requirement to provide up to 129 accessory off-street parking spaces within the proposed development. And then finally, the applicant requests a certification from the City Planning Commission pursuant to Section 32435 to waive the requirement that a minimum of 50% of building wall facing upon a wide street be occupied at the ground level by commercial uses. The areas that are being requested to be waived are located right here and right here. So this is where the school will be located. The proposed Sendero Verde development is being analyzed as an alternative in the draft environmental impact statement for the proposed East Harlem rezoning. The Sendero Verde development alternative would not result in any additional significant adverse impacts as it relates to shadows or historic resources than those that are already identified for the East Harlem rezoning proposal. Additionally, the Sendero Verde project would have a potential adverse open space impact, plus significant adverse transportation and construction-related noise impacts beyond those identified in the East Harlem rezoning proposal. Mitigation measures to address these impacts will be explored between the draft and final EIS. Thank you.
Commissioner Cantor.
With respect to the very last item you mentioned, it struck me as I read it, would it be putting any constraints upon the commission if we were to approve this, if we were to certify this now rather than wait until we learn a bit more about the East Harlem redevelopment?
Well, it's traveling with the environmental impact statement for the East Harlem rezoning, so it needs to travel along with the same timeline as the East Harlem rezoning, as it's being analyzed in the DEIS for.
I guess my question is, does certification of this in any way create a potential inhibition to any of the activity? Our doing any changes or the community doing any changes?
Oh, no, no, there's still definitely room, and I think we anticipate as this project moves through the public review process that changes will definitely occur, and we can address further concerns at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Passive house standards, is that the new nomenclature now for green?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
gold standards? Could you?
Better than that.
I mean, I believe it's separate from LEED, but it is,
Lead, right.
Better than
yeah.
that. It's better
But
than-
it's very, I don't know actually the specific differences of LEED and passive house, but to my knowledge, they're either comparable or passive house may or may not be even
Better.
more environmentally friendly. But I don't know that answer for sure, and I can confirm that for you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Delahoo's.
When this comes back, are we going to have a breakdown of how many units at the various AMI levels and how many bedrooms? And
Yes.
Okay. I'm assuming that's all being
We're not
discussed.
there at this point yet, unfortunately.
I figured as much, or it probably would have been included here.
Yeah.
And just to confirm the 655 units or whatever that are here, those are separate than the 3,500 units that were discussed as part of the area-wide rezoning? Okay. And then my last question really has to do with this thereto verde, about its public access, and whether or not that would be a 24-hour kind of a thing, or if that's been discussed yet.
Well, the paths leading up to the open space in the courtyard, the hours will be determined between negotiations between HPD and the developer. So which kind of, in a sense, determines how long the open landscape area will be open to the public. I don't have an answer to what time that will be at this point, but I know that they are currently discussing the hours that are appropriate to both.
And if I may, and because of the change in grade, it would be helpful to know if there's anticipated signage to let people know about its accessibility and things like that.
I can definitely ask more information on the signage.
Other questions? Commissioner Marin?
Just along the lines of the courtyard, are there any accessible entrances or exits to the building from the courtyard, or are all the exits on the avenues and streets for the residents themselves? Because then that would dictate the use of and timing of that path.
There will be entrances from the community facility uses. They'll be able to enter the courtyards through that as well. But the main entrances are going to be from the path. I'm guessing, but I can see if there's any other entrances.
Because if the question is how long is this going to be open, and you do have residential active uses, then you obviously going to have residents coming in and out.
Yeah.
You can't really ban the public, and if it's lit. But if it's an area where it's just entrances to community facilities, maybe some retail or whatever is back there, it's a different story than having residential access.
And I can confirm the accessibility. Perhaps, and I'm not positive. I'm just speculating, honestly, that if the paths were to be closed, that maybe, I'm not sure, I can check, that the residents would still have access through their own entrances. I can check, I'm not really sure. But for the general public, it seems that it would typically be determined based upon the hours that the path is available to the general public.
And along those lines, would the community gardens be, because the community gardens, I guess, are operated by their own individual operators. And there are 3 community gardens, so are the entrances and exits to the garden also going to be restricted, or will they be maintained and operated by the garden operator? And the reason why I ask these questions is because having done a development next to a community gardens can be a little bit disruptive at times if they stay open all night. So just putting it out there that there needs to be some kind of protocols in terms of the use of these gardens, even though they are green thumbs.
The community, yeah, they will be under the jurisdiction of Parks Department, but I can confirm, I'm not sure what the hours of operation will be for the gardens, but I can get back to you with that information.
Commissioner Arfon?
This is not detracting from the merit of the project, but the developer states that one justification for the 37 stories is the 20-story towers, and I just am questioning whether that's adequate justification. It's nearly double. I'm making it a question.
A legitimate question. Other comments? Well, I will thank the commission for your good questions and also your patience on 2 highly technical presentations. I promise you, the next one is going to be much more straightforward. And with that, we'll treat this application as certified. Maybe not. And also give our thanks to the Manhattan office and give them a brief respite before they return later.